Thinking about what my message would be today, I asked my husband, Don, if he knew of anyone in his circle of family and friends who died in the line of military duty. He said no, but that he remembered when he was a kid, his grandparents, who were active in an American Legion post, would involve the family in selling paper poppy pins on Memorial Day. The Women's Alliance of the Legion made the pins for sale to raise funds to benefit those in need who are veterans of military service or dependents of those who had died in military service. I wasn't sure about what he remembered because I thought those red poppies were a very British thing. So I looked it up and had an aha moment when I was led to the poem, Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks still bravely sing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high if you break faith with us who die. We shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. This poem was written by a Canadian soldier of World War I, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, a physician and poet. In 1915, he was stationed on the front line of several strategic battle sites in Western Belgium, referred collectively as Flanders Fields. The day before he penned his famous poem, McCrae had buried a close friend in action. It was a makeshift grave among numerous others, and McCrae saw that after just a few days, wild poppies began to spring up around the grave markers. There are unverified stories about how McCrae's handwritten poems survived the trenches, but there are extant versions of it. Apparently, it had become popular among McCrae's troops, and he obliged them with copies. In some versions, he wrote, "The poppies grow," instead of "the poppies blow." Well, 3 years after writing that poem in 1918, McCrae was assigned to a medical corps in Boulogne, France. McCrae contracted meningitis there and died. His poem lived on and inspired Remembrance Day in Canada. Interestingly, it was a woman named Madame Anna Guerin of France, a humanitarian and war lecturer who did the most in establishing an inter-allied connection in wearing a red poppy on Remembrance Day. In 1920, she was on tour in the United States and was invited to speak to an American Legion convention in Cleveland, where she shared her idea of silk poppies produced by war widows to raise funds for themselves, their dependents, orphans, and veterans in need in all Allied countries. In her eloquence, Madame Guerin was successful. When she went back to France in 1921 on Armistice Day, now that's Veterans Day, the marking of the end of World War I, Madame Guerin sent poppy sellers to London, where it caught the eye of leaders in the British Royal Legion. And to this day, buying and wearing red poppies is widespread in Commonwealth nations like Great Britain, Canada, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. Well, a bit of history for us and the mystery solved between my husband selling these puppies as a kid in 1960s Baltimore and the fact that every red-blooded Brit sports a red poppy on their lapel on Armistice Day. But let's return now to In Flanders Fields. In his poem, McCrae gives voice to the dead soldiers. He imagines that they urge the survivors to take the torch of battle and carry on. If not, the dead soldiers would not rest. It's a bit haunting, isn't it? The image of being given a missive from the grave to hold the torch high and keep the war going. Later critique of McCrae's poem suggests that because he wrote from his experience of the early stages of World War I, he may have over-romanticized warfare and a hero's death. Nonetheless, it's doubtful he could have anticipated the way in which those last lines of his poem would be used as propaganda in furthering the cause of future warfare, from recruiting soldiers in World War II to selling war bonds. A familiar image is a soldier holding up a torch. By the end of World War I, however, the horrors of trench warfare and chemical warfare became known across the globe. Transatlantic cable allowed rapid distribution of details of these horrors, and the world was shocked by the inhumanity of it. And of course, the survivors returned home with stories and scars. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, was termed shell shock in the aftermath of World War I. And Don's grandfather, George Shinneman, fought with Allied forces in France and was exposed to mustard gas. He was lucky to survive, but he lived the rest of his days with emphysema. Since the Revolutionary War, our nation has suffered the loss of over 1.3 million soldiers and military personnel in warfare. Over half of that was in the Civil War alone. US military operations in World War II cost the lives of over 400,000. What would those fallen wish for us today? Would they want us to pick up the torch, raise it high, and carry on the war in their honor? Well, we can never know for certain. But there has been so much of war studied, written about, analyzed, debated, judged, reported, and so many stories told. There is so much in our culture that suggests that perhaps the fallen would wish for us today to study war no more. The Dalai Lama says war is obsolete. Such a simple, eloquent statement. Of course, war is obsolete. It's a colossal waste of lives and precious resources. But as long as there are leaders in the world whose lust for power and amoral agendas put millions of innocent lives at risk, we as a nation cannot turn our swords into plowshares. Until there is justice, equity, and compassion in our human relations at home, between neighbors, in our cities, our nations, and between nations until there is justice, equity, and compassion between human beings in all nations, between nations. We will not know peace. As Unitarian theologian Parker Palmer said, and which Dr. Martin Luther King essentialized in the way that he could essentialize things, said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And the justice which I just cited, which is part of our Unitarian Universalist faith, that one day we might have beloved community the world over. But that justice will be long in coming to fruition. In the meantime, we can be thankful that the death toll in US military conflicts has dropped dramatically to 7,000 in the Middle East military operations combined from 2001 to present. Yet, as Chris bravely shared with us this morning, that's 7,000 people who lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, who loved and were loved, and who no longer walk among us. That is 7,000 too many still. And now we observe nervously the war Putin is waging on Ukraine and wonder how bad things have to get before we are drawn into an unthinkable conflict with Russia. We as a nation live in a complex geopolitical world. We as a people must face the possibility of encountering violence in our lives and being a nation at war. I hope with all my heart that that will end. But as long as despots still exist in this world, we remain at risk. So let me leave you with some profound wisdom from a colleague, which I hope you find comforting. Captain George Tiger is one of a handful of Unitarian Universalist chaplains serving in the U.S. Army Reserves. He's been deployed to Afghanistan multiple times. In 2013, he published a book of short essays about his experiences titled War Zone Faith. In one of these essays titled A Soldier's Burden, George tells us that faith can be a yoke. Faith can be a burden that must be worn all the time. Yet paradoxically, that same burden of faith can save us from ourselves when we might otherwise fall into despair at all the hurt in the world. Or facing a tragedy or a violent act with only our fragile egos and our fearful reptilian brains to help us cope, we can easily be traumatized. Alone, we can become bitter, angry, even hateful. George says that in carrying our faith everywhere we go, we come to understand our lives as meaningful. Our faith gives us the strength to endure the hurt, the chaos, the uncertainty of our lives. Our burden of faith paradoxically frees us, relieves us of our fears. And by faith to you all today, I mean our Unitarian Universalist faith. The faith that calls us to live by deed, not creed. The faith that assures us we are originally blessed, not born in sin. The faith that says creating a heaven on earth is possible. George Tiger gives us his example. He says, quote, "Living and working in combat, knowing that just outside the gate are people who would like to kill you, seeing your friends shot dead or blown to bits before your eyes, makes it easy to become hateful and angry. For us, the more difficult way is to face the violence, the danger, the pain, and the anger of war without embarking on revenge or building hate in our hearts. The more difficult way is to face the violence, the danger, the pain, and the anger of war without embarking on revenge or building hate in our hearts." George continues, "This is how we are called to live. This is how we are called to live our lives. In the face of so much death, we turn to each other in compassion. We turn to each other, soldiers, turning to each other in compassion and caring, and affirm that our faith is more powerful than our deepest hatred and most burning anger. Only then," he says, "our yoke will be easy and our burden light." Imagine how challenging that would be to face that kind of danger every day and not give in to your fears. And that's why he says it's so important for us to keep our faith before us. Our principles and values which call us to create, to work at creating beloved community, to face this world together in compassion and caring, affirming that our Unitarian Universalist faith is more powerful than any hurt, fear, anger, hatred, or pain we might face in our lives. So today, let us remember those who gave their lives in wars past. And let us imagine that what they would wish for us is to understand the power we have to put love and light into a hurting world. Let us put love and light into a hurting world. I hope it will be so for you today, tomorrow, and all the days going forward. I would like to take just a moment to take a deep breath, a deep collective breath. Stephen, maybe you could play softly for us. Let us give some space to this mix of sadness and memory, this holding that we do when we know mostly peacetime in our own living. Yet holding the violence, the human constructs of evil that exists in our world. Let us gather in what we each believe is a source of inspiration and love, something larger than all of the small, yet sometimes very difficult affairs of humanity. And gathering to us that love light, let us also let go of any fears, and come into the rest of this day with the joy of our lives given gratuitously. Amen. Thank you, Stephen. At this time in our service, our share